Welcome to another episode of Wild and Well. Today I'm talking to Lucia Silver, who is the founder of the Brain Health Movement. And we are going to be talking about so many different things, but mainly about how we can support our children's brain health and development and how we can take care of ourselves as mothers in that process and why that is so critical. So welcome, Lucia. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation. The work that you're doing is so incredible. It's changing so many children's and families' lives. But before we get into all of that, can you tell us one thing that you did today to take care of you?
Oh, well, first of all, hello and thank you for having me here. This is really important work you're doing too. So I'm thrilled that we can align and amplify everything we're doing to support families at large. Um, what did I do? Oh, to help myself to I take a dog walk every morning. It's my sacred space and I don't miss it. I really don't miss it. And if I can't take it for me, then I take it for my dog. That kind of helps me sometimes because I know if it was for me the hour, I might skip it. But every single morning, I go up into the woodlands and by the water, which is super cleansing for me. And I take an hour's walk. And I do that just after I drop Quinn in the morning. So, if for any reasons we've had a difficult morning getting to school, then it's a great place for me to ground and reset. If it wasn't so cold in the UK, I would take my shoes off and pad around with bare feet. In the summer, I'll do that. But in the winter, I just make do with hugging some trees and staring at some water.
It's beautiful. We would all be in such a different place if we started our days hugging trees and looking at water.
Yeah, yeah.
So, can you share a little bit about your journey that you've been on with your son Quinn and how this has led you to founding the Brain Health Movement?
Of course. And like so many of us within the space of neurodevelopment, trauma, any type of support that we're giving to mothers, fathers, and families, we started with our own story. And that's very much the case for Quinn and myself. Our podcast is entitled "My Mighty Quinn," so everything is really in recognition of him and the work that he, for first and foremost, has done to thrive and flourish and get well and heal. So yes, I mean our journey started with a birth trauma really, and it's a funny story to tell because the story I would have told 5 years ago, the uninformed story, is so different from the story I tell now. So I always have to kind of reset and think, what was I going through back then? Because now I know what we were going through. Back then, there was no support, there was no information, and that was what made it so incredibly, it compounded the difficulties that we were having because there was no support. And we were being told there was nothing wrong. But looking back, if you want me to kind of, to start at the beginning, his birth was traumatic. And I now understand that that was the beginning of what I would call the perfect storm and what the doctors and pediatric experts in our space at the Brain Health Movement called the perfect storm. And it's a stacking of neurological, immune, and trauma and environmental stresses that are derailing so many of our kids. And it's not all the same for every child, and the symptoms are not all the same for every child, but there is a huge correlation between many of the things that we're seeing and many of the symptoms that are presenting. So by the time Quinn had a very difficult arrival, there were 15 doctors in the room. They were all in a state of elevated panic because we couldn't get him out. In short, and forceps and ventouse and pulling and pushing and drugs and all sorts were being brought into the picture with very little effect. And both myself and Quinn were getting in greater distress until I remember there was anything I remember hearing actually was a senior consultant coming in, leaning over the doctor's shoulder as he was trying to pull Quinn out. And the doctor saying to the senior consultant, "She's very small down there." And the senior consultant going, "I don't give a bleep, get that baby out." And that the whole, just the emotional landscape, let alone the physical landscape, was so hectic and Eventually, Quinn arrived, but was taken away from me quite quickly because he had a little hole in his lung. He wasn't breathing properly. He was clearly in distress, and we spent the next 2 weeks in intensive care. Me very damaged down below, and Quinn on all sorts of support. I subsequently found out later that he was also on antibiotics. But this is, in many ways, quite a typical delivery for children, without trying to tell the story more broadly. But there are many mothers who will have a similar story. But ultimately, we were sort of just waved out, like bye, at the end of the 2 weeks. Like that was a kind of normal thing to go through, and no one checked in on us. If it hadn't been for Quinn and I just absolutely persevering, the two of us, I couldn't really sit, so I sort of mounted on strange cushions to stop me from sitting, but in order to breastfeed. And we just kept going. We were so lucky we had a midwife there who just kept encouraging us. And after about just 5, 6 days, he latched on, and I was able to breastfeed him for the next 18 months, which I think curtailed, or at least stopped, a lot of the emerging symptoms. We were so lucky that we had breastfeeding, and I was a healthy eater, and Quinn was a healthy eater. And so actually nothing particularly surfaced. But had I known now what I had I known then what I know now, I would absolutely have taken Quinn straight away for some chiropractic care myself as well. We would have looked at his autonomic nervous system then, because it was totally dysregulated coming into the world in that way. We'd intended a birth pool and at home and candles and music. I mean, it was nothing like that. It was a complete catastrophe. And the two of us, I think, arrived home completely bulldozed. Really, that was the feeling. And we were very blessed that Quinn actually did sleep and did breastfeed and did eat and all of those things. So he was unusual in that respect. Most kiddies who have that start will manifest things straight away. He didn't. So I can't say to you, and answer your question, what did you first see? There wasn't anything particularly early, except that he never did a firm poo, which is definitely an early sign. His stool was not in great shape, and I went to the doctor first of all for that. Um, I haven't taken antibiotics in my life ever. So to say that I was upset when I found out only 3 years ago, pulling out his birth records, that they'd given him a load of antibiotics in the hospital, already dysregulated his gut. So we've got some issues there already. But when I took him to the doctors to discuss the story, I was told again and again, there's no problem, don't worry, it'll settle, it'll settle. But if your child's poop isn't, poop, sleep, and eating, these are the three main markers, right? And then there's their motor development. And if these things are not developing in the recognized order, and there is a recognized order, we're getting very lax about it now, saying, oh, if they don't crawl for another 3 months, it doesn't matter. But that isn't the case. These are very, very specific milestones, and our children do need to meet them. And if they don't, that's a red flag. So all these things were ignored, and nothing really was particularly surfacing. A few little allergies here and there, but nothing particular. A few little meltdowns, but again, if anything, it was all quite under the surface. There were no terrible twos. There was a lot of stuff not happening, so no cause for concern until a little bit later. I would say 7, 8. This tic appeared, and this tic became more and more and more prevalent, and more exaggerated and more invasive. Until it became a fully inverted motion where he would literally put his head to his ankles from a standing position, kick both arms out behind him, and flap them and lift one leg. I don't even know if you can imagine what that looks like a sort of inverted flapping chicken. And if you can believe it, the powers that be, from the educational psychologists to the OTs or else, was just like, that's okay, that'll go away. And I was like, there's nothing okay about that. I mean, I love my son, and if he carries on doing that for the rest of his life, I will still love my son. But that is an extraordinary movement. His body is without question trying to tell us that something is uncomfortable, unhappy, needing regulation, is off kilt, is out of whack, is something, but anything but okay. And I had to keep fighting and fighting and fighting, and I wasn't getting any answers at all. And the tic was becoming more and more and more invasive to the extent he couldn't socialize. It was getting in the way of school days, of playtime, of friendship. until I started to research. And I ended up, Googling at 2 a.m., studying, reading experts, finding neurodevelopmental experts. No one in conventional mainstream uh, medicine practice had any answers for me. I had to go off-piste, although nowadays it doesn't feel so off-piste to be dealing with functional medical nutritionists and functional neurologists. This is now the root cause approach. And I wanted to know why. That was the point. I wasn't happy to be just told that, if it doesn't go away, there might be some medication in a few years' time that we can give him. I mean, that was the worst outcome for me, because I knew that wouldn't be telling me what was causing this and what we needed to look at. So I started to look at birth trauma. I started to look at neurodevelopment, at things called primitive reflexes. Should they be there? Shouldn't they be there? At the autonomic nervous system development. What does it mean if a child is stuck in fight or flight? And we started to do some extraordinary work at home together on his primitive reflex integration, and a little bit of development work on his balance centers and on his vestibular systems, his eye tracking and his movements, and getting him. And he went from being a really quite uncoordinated little guy to being was accepted into the football team, a fantastic footballer, hugely coordinated. He started engaging with his friends, super confident, super connected. And he just said to me, Mummy, I feel in my body. I feel in my body. It was the most extraordinary breakthrough, but we hadn't quite dealt with everything yet. But those were the first signs. Those are the first signs.
Wow, that's quite the story. And I imagine there's people listening that they everybody's story is different, but there's probably a lot of people who resonate that they knew intuitively that something wasn't quite right, even though all the people around them were saying it's okay, it will pass.
Yeah,
This
exactly
is
that.
fine. So,
Exactly that. And there is something wrong. If your kiddie isn't, the perfect storm, and we'll come on to it shortly, but it's not normal to not latch on. It's not normal to not um to to not have a firm stool. It's not, these are, to not sleep, to be crying all day, to have colic. This is the body's way of communicating to us. And so I knew that something was not all right. And we were helping within the neurodevelopmental area. But then in the summer of 2023, Quinn had a huge seizure. And many within the space regard tics to be mini seizures. So, and he suddenly, really over an intensive period of time, started to show up with all sorts of motor tics, and so motor tics being vocal tics, noises, making noises. And then he was tapping on the desk at school, and then he was running away from teachers, and then he had this dreadful anxiety suddenly came up, and then he couldn't sleep, and was dysregulated and angry. And I would just couldn't recognize my son. This came from sideways. And again, I got back already. I'd started in the brain health movement. I was already trying to promote the information that I was finding. Look at root causes, mamas. Come on, stop, reverting to drugs. Find out what's going on. Find out. So I was already in the space with a lot of experts. And at this point in time, one of the brilliant experts that is on our course and is one of our great advocates is Dr. Joshua Madsen. And he said, Lucia, I said, what's going on with my son? I don't understand. We were doing all this incredible work. And he said, thank God you were doing this incredible work, because I think this is PANS, and this could be so much worse if you hadn't done this groundwork. And I was like, well, what is this? And for those who don't know, who are listening, this condition PANS is, I can't tell you how many parents have reached out to me and said, I didn't even know this. This is what it sounds like my child is experiencing. It's pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric syndrome. And there are two versions of it. There's PANDAS, which is an autoimmune response, a misdirected autoimmune response in relation to a strep infection, particularly. And then there is PANS, which is particularly really any stressor, any inflammatory stressor. And instead of the body attacking if it was an infection, for example, if it was a microbe or a bacteria or a virus, it attacks itself and it creates this huge inflammation in the brain. autoimmune, this encephalitis, it's called, this inflammation in the brain, and it will attack certain areas of the brain, particularly the basal ganglia, which causes tics and OCDs and repetitive behavior. So this is why we see some children suddenly presenting psychiatrically from nowhere, or there's a sort of very low ebb and then suddenly it peaks. And parents, I just don't recognize my child. They can become aggressive. They can start bedwetting. They can become violent towards their parents, the school refusal. They get chronic OCD. So, tapping and moving things, or suddenly frightened of fruit, or suddenly frightened of their eating restrictions can come on very strongly. So it's a horrible condition, a horrible, horrible condition. And it is sadly very unrecognized. And typically people will jump on it, the medical community, and think that it's psychiatric, like bipolar, or they might jump on it and think it's autism, but then why would that suddenly present out of nowhere? Doesn't make sense. But nonetheless, these are the strange diagnoses that are given. And I felt every day I was firefighting. I was desperate for answers, bouncing between specialists, Googling at, the silly hours, endless appointments. And yet the message I kept getting was, it'll be okay. But at this point, school was saying we can't have him in the classroom. We love him. We don't understand what's happened. We've known him for the last 7 years. We don't get what's happening now, but he's disruptive, understandably. So, I had to become a detective, and I had to become an advocate for my own child, not just to help him get well, but to keep him in school. I was now dealing with a way bigger issue. But fortunately, the experts that are on my course, some of the world leading experts on PAN specifically, were right there and able to explain a lot of what was going on. And so I learned from these leading neurologists and these functional medical doctors, nutritionists, and trauma therapists, because at this point, not only is Quinn's nervous system fallen right off track, but guess who's also pretty doolally at this point is mum, right? I was just lost in this complete. Who could I talk to? Who was going to advocate for me? I've got doctors going, we don't know what this is. So I took him for brain, QEEGs to make sure, because of the seizures. I had to be sure there wasn't anything really pernicious going on in his brain. No, all clear there. Nothing wrong with his brain. Nothing wrong. This just seems to be some sort of developmental thing. I mean, like, what do you mean neurodevelopmental thing? What is going? Nothing. So by this point, I was really just keeping going with the mainstream in order to journal how ridiculous what I was being told was, or what I wasn't being told, as the case may be. And meanwhile, I was following a roadmap of things that were really having a fantastic effect on him. And for me, the most important thing was to identify what was stressing his body. What was the first line that was creating this inflammatory response? Because his body is totally overreacting to many, many things. We found out that it was mold, in the first instance, that had been, if you like, the straw that had broken the camel's back. But with a child with PANS, it's just a kind of storm waiting to happen in many ways. But we were unfortunate that there was a big exposure to mold, and this is what suddenly flipped the barrel, if you like. And so we had to, deal with that first. And we did actually have to use, this is where I often say to parents, sometimes there is a place for medication if the body is failing to fight something. So in this case, we had a complete overgrowth of mycoplasma pneumonia in his body and some other viruses, and he needed some help. And you can imagine what it took for me to say yes to an antibiotic, but I only did it in line with functional medical doctors who were going to support the gut microbiome straight afterwards, so that we could get rid of the most offensive microbes, if you like, that were causing this stress to his body. And then the job, which is where, mainstream will just give you antibiotics and keep giving you antibiotics. But here, what we needed to understand was, how do we re-educate his body naturally to stop having this response? Is there a way to do this? And that is what we moved to do. So we got, and we still do have to keep an eye, the royal we, this is Mama and Quinn and I, keeping an eye on things that are going to stress his system, and gently through herbals and natural supplementation, fortifying his organs and teaching his body how to respond appropriately to infection. I believe Quinn will be diagnosis free in the not too distant future. But the most important thing is, I got him back into school. I got a full recognition from the educational psychology boards in the UK to recognize the condition. I was able to get him to a new school, absolutely normal, fabulous school that he adores, and he's back in there loving it. We're now in year 8. He loves his sport. He eats like a horse. I just can't fill the fridge quick enough. He is a very, very well child, and we just are now dealing with getting his system fully regulated. So there's the story.
Yeah, it's a big journey, isn't it? And you're still on it. It sounds like you've done so many significant things, not just for you and for him, but also for changing this for other parents. So you're making it easy for them to get to those diagnoses or understand that they even exist quicker as well. Yeah, that's incredible. So what are some signs, like you mentioned quite a few signs that parents could look out for that you noticed in Quinn that might be indicating that something could be off? What are some of those? Because some of them are like, not having the solid poo. Okay, that's something that we might not recognize as being a problem, whereas other things like the tics are more severe. Can you tell us a few different things from those that are more minor, appearing more minor, and those that are more significant?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my intuition is always to sort of pull back the lens, and we're so close to it as particularly as new mums. We're so close to everything, and we're totally spun out with our own hormones. And if we're trying to breastfeed and we're trying to maybe sometimes navigate work still or stop working, or change in family dynamics, this is why this education is so important, because you don't know what you don't know, and you can't be aware of something if you don't know what you're looking for. I mean, everything I'm saying now, for any mama who's listening and going, oh my, I didn't know that, I didn't know this, I didn't know any of this, and I thought I was a really quite a well-informed person. I didn't think I went into childbirth naive, but some of the things, that's the simplest of things, like I didn't know that movement grows the brain. If you'd asked me, what does a child need to grow, I'd have said, well, mummy's cuddles and oxygen and milk and then food, breast milk and then food. But there's a lot more that a body needs to develop. So you don't know what you don't know. I just want to say that as a premise, because I often, when I start talking mothers, I think there's a sense of, why didn't I know that? Well, indeed, why don't we collectively know this? We should be, you know, given lots to learn when we're thinking of conceiving. This is when we should have this information, not when we're trying to deal with the symptoms that are presenting many years later. But the story begins very early, Hilary. The story starts at the before birth, maternal stress, birth trauma. As I've said, if there has been an intervention, a C-section, modern day birth interventions, von 2s, forceps, antibiotics, epidurals, it is far better to assume right at that point that something might have happened, and to take your child to a neurologically focused chiropractor who can have a look at the nervous system, have a look at the alignment of the spine after all the tugging. One of the things I said in a podcast to Dr. Tony Ebel, who's our kind of birth trauma specialist, and this whole first step process in our arrival into the world before this perfect storm begins. I said to him, if you handle the baby that way at any other time than in the delivery room, you would be arrested. The way my child was tugged and pulled, the way a typical child is pulled out of C-section by the most fragile part of its cervical spine and brainstem, the most important developing fragile part of its brain. So what I would say from the onset is start at the beginning. A diagnosis didn't start, it started with a delivery. It might have even started prior to a delivery. If you've been stressed as a mama, were you on antibiotics? Were what was your environment like while you were gestating, while you were pregnant? From there, there are many early signs of children's disrupted systems. They don't latch on, they don't breastfeed, they have colic, they don't sleep, ear infections, and then the cascade begins from there. And then once the gut is out of balance, which you see in the stool, or you're seeing gripey, uncomfortable tummies, then the neuromotor delays follow. And then in turn, you see behavior affected and emotional dysregulation and meltdowns very early that don't that take a long time to resolve, a lot of emotional dysregulation. And then later on, it manifests in learning and attention difficulties. That's the later development of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning of the brain. It sort of shows up there. But in order to resolve all of those, we have to go right back to the beginning, to the foundations. It's like parents going, oh, I'm just going to go to a speech and language therapist, or I'm just going to go to a talkie therapist. It's like sort of expecting the lights to go on when the electrical wiring isn't in. It is literally that. You're building a house and you need solid foundations. So a lot of these things that we see are indications of something you need to dig deeper and find earlier on.
And what are the foundations specifically, like, in the work that you do in your program with all the experts that you work with? What are the main foundations that parents can start addressing to support their kids, whether they have a baby or they have an 8-year-old?
It's a huge question, and I think a lot of it is very simple, and then a lot of it can feel very overwhelming when you start to, if your child is symptomatic, you're sort of chasing lots of things, aren't you? Um, if you're starting afresh with a little person, then the obvious things are that we cover, all of this in the course. But the other things are, first of all, what state are you in as mum? And we'll come on to that later because I know how important that is to you and all of the work that you do. But mum's stress state, we little people, little babies, and in fact up to the age of 26, cannot regulate themselves. That part of the brain that allows everything to calm down, to come out of fight and flight, it's not even developed. It's not developed until 26. So when we say that co-regulation, which is in a sense the borrowing of the mother's nervous system in order for the child to calm down, that system is not even there for them. They borrow our nervous systems to calm down. And so if a child is unable to do that, that's not a that's a serious issue. I always say co-regulation is not a nicety; it's a biological necessity, as Stephen Borges, of amazing polyvagal theory, who studied and has done so much research and helpful education in this area. So I would say the first thing is to look at your own health as a mother. In conception, it would be how your stress levels and how you're eating and how you're living, and make sure that you have a good support network. Um, Next of would really be the birth itself. Look into that. Make sure that if anything has happened in that area, if there's been any interventions or trauma, you need to go back and see your neurologically focused chiropractor. Go and have the um, craniosacral therapy is helpful as well. But anything that's kind of addressing that central autonomic nervous system, and then movement, and more movement, and letting them move and letting them feel and get feedback and be in the dirt and in the ground and climb trees. And that is so important. That is actually what grows the brain. And Dr. Robert Melillo and Dr. Joshua Madsen and the key neurodevelopmental experts with us on in the movement and on the course. It's such a simple thing, but I don't think we realize, as busy mums, they're in the car seat carrier, then they move along. You keep them in there because you don't want them, running around. So you keep them in their little seats, don't you? And then what's happening a lot now is you're handing them a screen, and then they're on a little phone and they're keeping themselves entertained. They need interaction. They need skin on skin. They need trees. They need dirt. They need sensory input. They need to develop their balance centers. The more movement, the better. The more connection with nature, the better. And this is so obvious to say, but it's not happening. You ask someone of our generation now, I just don't see kids playing in the backyard like I used to. They're all sitting on their sofas on screens. And that has a huge impact on brain development, a huge impact, socially as well. If you're not reading body language, you're not understanding cues and rhythms of speech, and so much is missing. Um, and unfortunately, with socioeconomic pressures, and a lot of parents are just like, well, that's the only babysitter I have. I have to give them a screen. I don't have any other way. So it's difficult. And the cards are in many ways stacked against our little people because there's just so many things that are tricky. And then there's diet. That's a huge area. Diet. So keeping food clean, keeping them away from ultra processed foods, keeping away from the chemicals and the horrible things that are sprayed, particularly for you guys in America. You know, so much is sprayed on your food. Huge correlatory studies now showing um, diagnoses around, you know, ADHD and autism and environmental toxins and so forth, and vaccinations. Is this buildup of stresses for kiddos that just cannot detox, cannot get rid of these toxins. So what are you feeding them? And is this food causing an aggravation? That's an area that you can look at too. Is it causing irritation? Are there allergies? Is there something there that is causing more inflammation and dysregulation? If there is, the first thing you can do is stay out of packeted food, stay out of processed food, stay in the fruit and veg alleyway in the supermarket. Um, Keep them off screens. So there are very specific things that we can do. Um, it's not a genetic story. There may be genetic predispositions. You know, the genes may be loading the gun, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger, as we say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk a lot about how our own nervous system and how we take care of ourselves as moms is so critical. We've had a few conversations about this together. Why is it so important as a mother that she takes care of herself in this journey? This is a mission that I'm on. I want moms to truly prioritize themselves. And I don't think our society lends itself to having moms believe that. I think we always put others first. We put our kids first, but that's ultimately failing our kids, isn't it? So why do you see it being so critical, especially with moms who are navigating issues like PANS and PANDAS and all the other things that you mentioned?
It's a very tall order, isn't it, when we say, you know, take care of yourself, find time for yourself. I think some mums just want to go, oh, screw it. What do you mean? You know, that's easily, you know, it feels like another thing to do. You know, find time to relax. When am I going to find time to relax? You know, there are some of the mums that you know, that come to me for one-on-one parent coaching. They might have three children with various dysregulation issues, and they might be a single parent, or they might have a very disengaged partner. And you say to her, you just need to find time for yourself. It's like a red flag to a bull in many ways. It's like, when am I going to do that? Because already I am just the demands of every, and you're containing. If you're doing the job that we're suggesting through keeping calm in order to lend your nervous system to children to be able to regulate, you you don't have anywhere to go. You're a container for all that stress and dysregulation all day long, and often well into the night and sometimes through the night, and you can't get away. So I don't say this lightly. It is extremely challenging to be able to find this time. But in the same way that you find that time for that appointment for your child, or that home cooked meal, or that's what was said to me as, Lucy, you're home cooking Quinn's food. You researched all these supplements, you do these exercises, you get him outside, you lie with him at night before you go to bed, you co-regulate. You need to put it in the diary like one of those things, because you wouldn't shift any of those things for your child. So can you, you know, can you find it for yourself? Even if it's that you peel away for 2 minutes just to reset with some breathing. It may be as small as that. It may be just a moment to roll your shoulders and change your breathing pattern, because you've been holding your breath, or shallow breathing, or breathing through your mouth, or hyperventilating, or just catching the odd moment here or there to help yourself get back. But really to understand that our children, it's not just that we need to be there to co-regulate for them. I believe we can actively obstruct them from being able to move forward and get well. When we talk about these stresses and these toxins that I've touched on, whether it's environmental toxins, you know, the molds and the microbes and the plastics and the glyphosates on the food, or whether it's um, allergies to food, glutens and dairies, it is also emotional stresses. trauma. So a child may be experiencing that at school, but they might also be experiencing that at home. And I'm not saying mum is causing it or dad is causing it, but it could be an aggravating factor. A child has to feel safe to heal. That's the bottom line. If we're not in a space of safety, and if we can't come out of the state of fight or flight and move our nervous system out of that, it is effectively keeping the child in an inflammatory state. And inflammation, said your CDC, is behind 14 out of 15 illnesses other than injuries, the 15th being an inadvertent injury. All other 14 listed illnesses is caused by inflammation. So if we bring everything back to that, then this emotional response is also inflammatory. So we have a duty of care to take care of ourselves. And that makes it sound a little bit more serious now, doesn't it?
And it is that serious. I think that is when I work with mothers and in the books that I've written, it's not just, oh, take care of yourself for you, because that's a lovely thing to do. That is important. But when we bring it into it actually being a duty of care for our children, that this is imperative that we do this, I find that that starts to switch things in our brains to think, this isn't just for me. This isn't just a nicety. This is essential.
Yes. And I think we hear these sort of glib, put your oxygen on first, put it's a bit like if you can't respect yourself, you can't respect anybody else. These are sort of platitudes, aren't they? But they're really profound.
Hmm.
They've become wallpaper or sort of background music. But they've become that way because they are so, so important. And I can genuinely say, as I've shared with you in our private conversations, I definitely felt and feel that this last piece in Quinn's healing is my healing. I need to address those parts of my nervous system that are triggered, that are uncomfortable, that are dysregulated, because we are so connected, particularly as an only child, mum and son, but anyway with our children collectively. But ours is just that little bit more intensified because we don't have siblings and we don't have a dad around and we don't have grandparents even. It really is the two of us that everything is that bit more concentrated. So he's going to feel everything that bit more acutely through me. And it was the last piece, but the most important piece of our course that I have now put in there right at the front, and so delighted to meet you and be able to explore this further with you. That self-care for mum, where are you at, mama, before you start this healing journey? It might be dad, but more typically I do find I'm speaking to mums on this journey, but of course it can be anyone who's in the chief carer position. We have to start with you. We actually have to start with your nervous system regulation. And when I started seeing myself cleaning the bath when I was in it, that type of neurotic, over exercised, hyperventilating, anxious state that I was in, I knew that I needed to get myself to the neurologically focused chiropractor. So Quinn and I both go for treatment. We both go. And he's at great pains to bring it to my attention when I'm not where I should be. Mum, I think we need to deal with your nervous system now because you're like right off track. So I I get it from him all the time, and just have to sit back and appreciate that we are enough. That's okay. That's not a criticism. That's actually a gift. That's actually a gift that I'm being offered there.
And I really appreciate that example of you going to the chiropractor with him. Like I do that with the osteopath. One of my sons go, I find it's dysregulating for my nervous system if I take both of them and myself to it, but one at a time. I take one of them and myself for a monthly appointment for our alignment. And it's doing those things where you're already doing them for your kids. You're making the beautiful meals for them. So you have to sit down and you have to eat that and take a few breaths and calm yourself before you eat it so you can digest it. It's doing all those things that we're doing for our kids, but just adding ourselves into that picture, isn't it?
It is exactly that. And actually we advocate throughout every single part of the course you do it with your child, because even I've alluded to these primitive reflex exercises, which are some of the original birth patterns that we go back and we develop, and these rhythmical movements and so on. So often I see mum with the same as her kid. She's got the same reflexes. She's jumpy if he's jumpy or the child's jumpy. So it's we talk about it as being a whole child healing roadmap, but actually it's a whole family healing roadmap. And you're quite right that not only is that a beautiful shift for the whole family to move through together, but that is essentially, it's a tribal thing. It's not, there's no child with a problem. There is a family unit, and there's some dysregulation in that family unit, and together we're going to shift it together. Not, I'm not going to sit and watch you doing your exercises. I would do most of those exercises with Quinn. When I say you need some movement at the end of the day, I go out with him with the cricket bat. I try and do it all with him. If he's gluten and dairy free, even though I'm not aware of having those issues, we don't have it in the house. And I now don't have gluten, or I occasionally have the odd piece of bread, but basically I'm eating like he's eating. I'm certainly eating like he's eating when I'm sitting with him. So we do it all together. And that is, as you say, I think it's that's healing in itself, because you're not looking at someone else and going, hey, you've got the issues and I'm just sitting here kind of managing you through that. No, we're going to do it together.
Yeah. It can actually be a lot more fun that way too. And it is easier if we do the things alongside them rather than expect our children to do something. It's really easy to say, you do this, but to have them actually do it, you have to be part of that, right? We have to model
100
that.
100%,
And
100%.
it's fun doing the primitive reflex exercises. I do those with my kids too because yeah, I got interested in it because of my children, but yet I realized just like you said, oh, there's a few things that I have to work on here. Not surprisingly, so many of us do. And to do them together can be quite enjoyable rather than trying to be a taskmaster, trying to get them to do some more homework.
100%, because it then becomes, let's just add another 10 things you can nag your child about when you're already getting them ready for school, trying to get them out of the bath, into bed, put the pajamas on, bring the washing down. Now do some exercises. Oh, I mean, come on. Yeah, absolutely. We do it together, and it's so much better.
And you've been mentioning a little bit about your program throughout this conversation, but can you talk to us a little bit more explicitly about it? Because I think there'd be a lot of parents listening that are desperate for this information.
Well, yes, I mean it is essentially addressing the root causes, transforming your child's life. It's all the answers you need in one place in the right order. And I think what I have endeavored to do is, from a mother's perspective, having gone through it, it's how do I deliver this simply so it's not overwhelming? Because it is overwhelming. That's the fact. It is overwhelming, and I don't want anyone listening here to think that that they're strange for feeling that this is too much. There are many days still now I feel it's too much. I have meltdowns in the supermarket because I cannot find clean food. And that's just one area of the areas that I'm addressing in getting Quinn so well. But the course ensures that there's no more of this piecing it together alone. This so-called bad behavior, it's biology. And so what we need to understand through the course is each of the experts is taking different pieces in the order of development, and it's giving you the opportunity to go back and understand how the brain and body and central nervous system has developed, where those pieces fit in, and how you can go back and go, right, so this is what I can do within diet. Right, this is what I can do within the immune system. Right, this is what I can do within neuromotor development, which is the primitive reflex integration, and how the brain hemispheres come online. And okay, this is what I can do within communication and good parenting. Okay, this is what I need to do with screen technology. I didn't know that this is what screens do. Oh, this is what sleep, this is what I need to look out for with sleep and breathing. So it's taking each piece chunk by chunk with, in most cases, the world leading expert in that area, teaching it to me as mum and through me. So I'm kind of making it digestible, and you take it at your own pace, because I want to say again, it is overwhelming. This is not a magic pill. This is a slow and thorough investigation back to the root causes so that you can identify What exactly is causing the issues for your precious person, and being able to slowly address each of those, and then have a community. We've built now an added community to support that, so that we're available for community calls, live community calls, because a lot of it is about feeling alone. A lot of parents are going through this with they may be feeling alienated, judged, overwhelmed, exhausted. It may be causing relationship problems. It often causes marriages to split up when kids are struggling. So we need to provide a community, a safe space that mums and chief carers can lean into. So we have a community there as well. And we've just recently also launched this one-to-one parent support with me, where parents can also have some time to just be heard and seen and supported, as you do with your families in the States. You know, this is what we recognize now, so that there's no overwhelm. Instead, there's just a feeling of great self-empowerment as you're learning and acting on each thing piece by piece. Just an hour a week, it's okay. Just it's an hour more than you did before, and it's an education that you didn't have before. So just gently, gently taking it in your stride and in your own time is so important, because we don't need another thing to do. That's for sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you talk about the overwhelm and how that is a completely normal part of it. And I think it's good to know that going into this because we all feel overwhelmed. We all are having our meltdowns, no matter where we are on this journey. I have mine. I had a big meltdown just a couple days ago with my kids, right? It still happens, but we're all going through this.
Yeah.
What do you find is helpful for the mothers that are feeling that overwhelm? Is it that what you've said there, taking it slow and having the community, or do you have any other pieces of advice to help them stay the course when things get to be all too much?
Ask for help. I am terrible at it. Um, and because I don't do it, everyone thinks I'm always okay. So I think being honest is a big part of it too, is just saying, not, oh, I'm so tired, because everyone says they're tired, even people who don't have kids and are, doing very little. Everyone is tired and busy, because that's just the saturation and the pace of life nowadays. But to really, I'll often take care to ask my close friends how they are twice, because the first time someone answers, it may just be, yeah, yeah, I'm fine, or yeah, I'm okay. Oh, I've had a rubbish day. But to really, really, share and pull in those people close to you who give you energy, who you feel safe to be, who you feel you are in any given day. There was a time when we raised our children in a tribe, and we were able to pass our baby to our sisters, our aunts, our elders, and go and, not break the continuum, not break the connection with the child, because there was a tribe raising this child. That's why they say it takes a tribe to raise it takes a village to raise a child. That's the antithesis of what I'm doing now. It's just me and Quinn. I have no one. So I need to seek out those support networks. And I think that is really important. If you don't have anyone immediately in your friends or in your family community, then seek out communities like the Brain Health Movement, where you can lean in and talk and be in a community where it's safe to say, I really hate my kid today, or I feel like the lousiest mum, or I just can't cope with one more meltdown, or whatever it is you need to put out there. Because for every time you do that, for every time you are vulnerable, for every time you are true, you're giving permission to another mum to lean in and go, oh, thank goodness someone else has said it, because that's exactly how I feel. Thank you for the permission to feel not enough today, or to feel like a bad mum today, and have another 20 mums go, but I'm like that. Hey, and there are the other mums who go, I don't have a problem with that. I'm fine with that. And then you can co-regulate, because that's what happens in a group of safe, supporting women, a sorority of sorts.
Yeah. And all on a similar journey, understanding the same information. That's so helpful too.
Yeah, yeah. And listening, as my lovely Quinn said to me, as I just shared with you before this, he said, "Oh, Mummy, I finally feel like you've listened to me properly." And my initial response to that was, "Oh my word, please don't tell me I failed at listening. Please don't tell me my child doesn't feel seen and heard when every ounce of my life is devoted to him, his, the condition, his healing, and other children's. It's all, how ironic could it be that I've not, but in those moments when I'm stressed and I'm triggered, I'm not available to him emotionally, and I need to understand how to be more so. And I felt myself really shifting again because I'm having this work done on myself, and I'm becoming more and more and more aware all the time of what it really means to meet your child's needs and have your own needs met. I was able to say to him, "I'm really sorry that you don't feel seen and heard. You're the most precious thing in the world to me. And there is nothing you could ever do that would stop me loving you." And I didn't try to justify myself by saying to him, "But I'm really stressed at the moment and I'm trying to work and I'm trying to," I just acknowledged how he felt, reflected back to him his words and what he'd said. And then I was silent. I didn't try. He said, "I don't want you to, what really makes me feel heard is when you don't comment and you don't challenge and you don't say anything, you just listen." And that would have normally been a criticism to me where I would have felt I needed to defend myself. But instead, I just breathed and I sat down at eye level with him and I was just quiet so that he could just unload it all. And in that space, something shifted because at the end of it, as I said, he said, "I think that's the first time you really, really listened to me." I was like, "Good. Well, maybe I'm getting better at that. And maybe you'll keep showing me how I can do better at that because I want you to feel heard." That was a huge shift. Um, so that's taken a lot of work to get to that, and there's no perfect mummying going on in this corner.
And you've only been able to get to that place not because you're only helping him, but because you are showing up for yourself. And that's a perfect example to show that self-work, that taking care of your own nervous system, you being aware of your own needs and the impact that those have on him. That shows what all that work can come to. And what a beautiful moment.
Yes, a really beautiful moment. To see your own child feeling fully acknowledged in the way that they need to feel fully acknowledged because you have been able to be present enough, aware enough, in that space enough to feel what he's feeling and feel what you're feeling. That will only produce profound connection, but that only comes from profound awareness and present state consciousness.
So for people who are listening who may not check the show notes, can you let us know where they can find you? And we will have all your course and everything and your website and your Instagram in the show notes. But just for people listening, can you let us know where we can find out more and sign up?
Yeah, for sure. So probably the best place is our website, thebrainhealthmovement.com. We're also on Instagram at the Brain Health Movement. And on the website itself, we've got all of our free resources listed under the resources tab. So I really want all our parents to avail themselves of. There's toolkits and there's guides, there's primitive reflex checklists, there's our podcast, A Mother's Conversations with World Leading Experts, by Mighty Quinn. And, you know, pertinent to where you and I have kind of deep dived a little bit today on the importance of mum's nervous system in the healing journey of our children. We have a free masterclass that we've just created recently, which is I'm in conversation with a neurologically focused chiropractor who does a lot of trauma informed nervous system work for mums specifically. And we talk about how it feels for mums. The perspective is we're so lost and forgotten in the picture a lot of the time. We're always focusing on our children. So this masterclass is very specifically about mum, and it's called From Burnout to Breakthrough. So I would definitely recommend that as a first listen. It's an hour, and that will give you some excerpts from the whole child healing roadmap, as well, with some of the experts speaking on that. So lots of juicy information there for everybody.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing for your son and how you've brought that into the world for so many other parents to help their own kids. And I really appreciate the significance that you're putting on mothers taking care of themselves because we can't do the rest of it if we don't have that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.